All right, we're going to give just another 3 minutes to see if anyone else wants to join, and then we'll dive in. All right, so apologies for anyone who tried to join last week. I had some technical issues, but everything should be worked out now. So we're going to go over this worksheet here, effects of selection on population, and we're just going to dive right in. So question 1, what effects can natural selection have on population? For example, what types of selection can occur in a population and how are these defined? So you see here we have directional, stabilizing, or disruptive selection, and we're going to go over each of those. And often I will take a moment to pause after sharing information just so you have time to take notes. So directional selection. If individuals that show extreme forms of a phenotypic characteristic are removed, then the mean for that characteristic can appear to move more negative or more positive. So we've got a graph here, and we've got these extremes on the low end. In this case, just one of them is being acted on. So say to the left here, we have very small bears, and to the right, we have very large bears. If we are selecting against the small bears, the phenotype or the trait is going to move to the right here towards these large bears. So we're going to see that mean, in this case, moving more positive because we're selecting against this left side. The next one we have is stabilizing selection. So selection can act against both extremes at the same time. the characteristic will appear to stabilize around the mean. So here we have this graph, and we've got the extremes on both sides. So say on the left we have white wolves, in the middle is gray wolves, and then on the right here is, say, black wolves. And possibly the black and the white wolves stand out more in the environment. Maybe they're both being acted against, and then we're going to see an increase in individuals with that gray phenotype. And that's what we're seeing here with stabilizing selection. We are stabilizing around that mean phenotype or trait. Next, we have disruptive selection. So if selection acts against that mean or average phenotype, it can lead to a production of polymorphic population. So here, let's say this left side is white flowers. We've got pink in the middle and red on the right. So we have selection acting against this pink flower. Maybe it's pollinated the least. Maybe bees are least attracted to it, has the least pollination. Selection is working against it. And in this graph here, we see there is still some of this mean phenotype. That pink in a polymorphic population, we will have lost that completely, and then we're just going to see those white and those red flowers. Okay, so question 2 is pretty involved, and I believe we have 6 scenarios altogether. And we're going to go over all of these questions here, but they will be listed again as we go over each scenario. But just as an overview, A is going to be decide whether or not natural selection is operating. In doing this, indicate whether there is variability in the population. If there is no selection, what does this imply about evolution? If there is selection, what is the nature of the variation? For example, what characteristics must the variation have for selection to operate on it? B, is there any indication that members of the population differ in fitness? If no, what does this imply about the operation of natural selection? If yes, describe the difference in fitness. C is going to be given your answers to part A and B. What trend should characterize the future behavior or composition of the population? We'll also be making a few graphs. So before we get going, how do we approach these questions? First, we're going to ask, what is being selected against? Could this phenotype or trait have genetic basis? In other words, could this trait be inherited genetically? And if yes, selection is likely occurring. And we're going to determine the type of selection. So scenario 1, a particular species of mouse feeds on the seeds of a single species of cherry tree. When the mice eats the seed, they digest it completely. That point is important because they're not ingesting it and dropping it somewhere else as a viable seed. Once eaten, the seeds are completely unviable. The mice choose seeds of intermediate and large sizes, leaving very small seeds of the cherry tree uneaten. So we're going to decide whether or not natural selection is occurring and indicate if there's variability in the population. So we can see that the mice are targeting the large size and intermediate size seeds and leaving the small ones. So here we have to assume that seed size is heritable. It's a heritable trait or phenotype. And with this selection is occurring. The variation here is the cherry seed size. So you are going to see that we're going to be making some assumptions. Remember that this is kind of just a thought experiment, and we're going to switch up our assumptions a little as we go and consider different types of assumptions. So just keep that in mind. If you're a little confused, you're not missing anything. It's just a thought experiment, or exercise rather. Okay, so part B. Is there any indication that members of the population differ in fitness? So we aren't given any indication in this scenario that there is any difference in fitness. So selection is against the very large, and the intermediate sized seeds and small seeds are not eaten. And if we are going to consider, oops, apologies for that, just one moment. So if no, what does this imply about the operation of natural selection? So therefore, more small seeds will be left to produce in the next generation. And as we know, fitness is the ability not only to survive, but to reproduce. And so here, all of the seed size have the same fitness, but we have more seeds left to reproduce because selection is acting against those intermediate and those large size seeds. So part C, given your answers to A and B, what trend should characterize future behavior or composition of the population? Okay, so if selection occurs long term, future generations of cherry trees would produce more small seeds. So here, because we have assumed that the seed size is a heritable trait, if we are having a loss of those intermediate and large seed sizes, we're losing those genetics. So over time, there's going to be a greater like frequency of the alleles that account for the small seed sizes. So the trend we're going to see is a greater production of the small seed size. Again, just trying to pause, give you a moment to take notes. Apologies if I went a little fast in the beginning there. So part D, we're going to graph the abundance of different sizes of cherry seeds over time. So you're going to put, we've got cherry seed abundance on the Y and time in seasons on the x-axis here. What's important to know about this is we are just looking for general trends. Obviously, we don't know the numbers, we don't have data sets. We're just looking for general trends. So this graph shows that over time, the abundance of medium and large seeds decrease, and the small seeds would increase. And again, this is just general trends. Your lines, if you drew this, would be, could be a little bit more squiggly. They might be have greater or lesser slopes. It's just about the trends. And just a fun thing to note here, we're having a reduction in those large and intermediate seeds, which is the food source for these mice. So it is possible that the reduction in those sizes of seeds could end up putting selective pressure due to availability of resources. So that's just a fun. I'm going to give you a moment to maybe jot down this graph. So we'll just take, maybe like 30 seconds here. Okay, and feel free to jump in the chat if you have any questions. Okay, let's move on to the next scenario. This is a long one. So a small island A contains 3 separate populations of a single species of tree. The seed sizes vary between the trees. That is, some trees produce seeds that are all in the small size range, Others produce seeds all in the middle size range, and others produce seeds all in the large size range. So one type of tree is only going to produce one size range of seeds. A small population of mice is introduced to the island. The mice eat the cherries and are the only predators on the cherry trees. When the mice eat a cherry, they completely digest it and the pit or seed inside it. The mice choose again the medium and large seeds and leave the small seeds uneaten. So again, we're going to decide whether or not natural selection is operating and is there variability in the population. So we're going to make the same assumptions here as we did for the last scenario, that seed size is a heritable trait or phenotype. And this would mean selection is occurring because we are selecting against the medium and the large phenotypes. So variation here is cherry seed size. Okay. So you'll notice on the left here, I have kind of blocked out some of this. And it's just a reminder, it's a good practice when you have these scenarios or these big word problems to kind of highlight the important information. It's a little easier to digest. So part B here, is there any indication that members of the population differ in fitness? So we've got kind of the same thing here. Individual seeds do not differ in fitness. We were given no indication in the scenario that they do. Selection is against the very large and the medium-sized seeds, and small seeds are not eaten. Therefore, more small seeds will be left to produce in the next generation of cherry trees. Okay, so part C, given your answers to part A and B, what trend should characterize the future behavior or composition of the population? So if selection occurs long term, future generations of cherry trees will produce more small-sized seeds. This is pretty much the same as that first scenario that we looked at. But we're going to consider, we have three different populations here. If the three populations are made up of three different size seeds, so population 1 only has trees that make small seeds, 2 only trees that make medium seeds, and the third population has trees that only make those large range seeds. We're going to see that the population with small seeds will become much larger over time compared to the other two populations. So any questions about that? Okay. So we're going to make another graph here, and we are also asked to indicate how this might impact the population sizes of the different types of cherry trees on the island, which we kind of touched on a moment ago. So I've kind of blanked this graph out. I'd love for you to take a minute to kind of create a graph on your own. So we're just going to take 1 minute, really simple little graph. And again, remember, these are just basic trends. There's no wrong or right exact value or slope or anything like that. So let's take 1 minute and just sketch some up. All right. Okay, so I didn't go ahead and fill this out for you, but there's a description here, and it's a lot. Um, it will probably look quite similar to the last one. So this graph would show that over time, the abundance of medium and large seeds would decrease, and the small seeds would increase. And touching on that population again, over time there would be many more of the small seed producing trees and less of the medium and large producing trees. Again, this is because each tree is only producing one range of sizes, and we are selecting against the large and the medium size seeds, so less of those seeds will be able to sprout new trees and start new generations. Okay, so we are going on to scenario 2, part B. So would your answer for scenario 2A change given the following information? As you continue to study the population of trees, you notice that the viability of seeds varies such that the viability of the small seeds is less than that of the middle-sized seeds, which is less than that of the largest seeds. So we're saying that the smallest seeds are the least likely to sprout and grow a new tree, and the large seeds are the most likely to sprout and grow a new tree. So whether or not natural selection is operating given this new information. So we're still assuming that the seed size is heritable. So selection is occurring, and the variation here is the cherry seed size. So nothing there has really changed by the fact that these seeds vary in viability associated with seed size. So again, we've got the important things highlighted here. The viability of the seed varies with size. So is there any indication that members of the population differ in fitness? They do differ in fitness here because that is what we are saying, is that the largest seeds are the most fit and the smallest are the least fit. So selection still here is against the very large and intermediate seeds. The small seeds are not eaten. So there will be more small seeds left to produce in the next generation. However, now we have this difference in fitness related to seed size. So the larger seeds are the most likely to survive and reproduce, even though they are selected against. So we have more small seeds, but they are less likely to reproduce. And we have less large and medium seeds, but those are increasingly more likely to reproduce. I'll go back here for a moment and give you a minute. Okay, so part C, given your answers to part A and B, what trend should characterize the future behavior or composition? So this one is a little more complicated. If we were really to understand future behavior in the way we've been looking at it before, where we're estimating what populations would increase, what would decrease, we would need a little bit more information. But what we can do is look at what we have and consider the information that's important for making these decisions. So both selection by mice and the relative fitness associated with seed size will need to be considered to characterize the future behavior or composition of the populations. So something to ask yourself, are there medium and large seeds left uneaten to reproduce? Because in future populations, the proportion of trees producing each seed type depends on the number of large and medium and small seeds that are uneaten and the relative viability of each. So I'm noticing, there it goes. I hope I wasn't freezing right there. So the future proportion, or the future population, and the proportion of trees producing each seed type depends on the number of large, medium, and small seeds that are uneaten and the relative viability of each. So this is a little more of a complex situation. We don't have a direct answer as to the characteristics or what would characterize future behavior or composition. We just kind of have the information that would be important, and we'd need actual data sets to really consider how the composition of the population would change. Okay, scenario 3. Small island B contains 3 separate populations of a single species of cherry tree. Unlike species on island A, in this species, seed size varies within the tree. That is, each tree produces seeds that range in sizes from large to small. A population of mice, again, is introduced. They're the only predators to this tree, and they fully digest the seeds, targeting the medium and large seeds and leaving the small seeds uneaten. So is selection occurring here? So if we assume that seed size is heritable, selection could be occurring. If each flower is individually pollinated to produce seeds, each tree could have different genes. So you'd be pollinating from any other flower on any tree back to maybe like a single tree in interest. So each of those seeds produced could have a wide range of genes due to that type of pollination. So what if we had this other observation here? What if we observed that cherries produced on shady areas of the tree have smaller seeds than those that receive more sunlight? So beyond our that seed is heritable, we actually now have this observation. We are seeing that the more sunlight an area of the tree receives, the larger the seeds are in that area. So this could indicate that seed size may be a result of available nutrients or growth conditions rather than a result of genetic differences. So again, I know this wasn't mentioned in the scenario, but we are just exploring some different thought processes here. So don't get too hung up on that. Let's just consider it. Just a moment to take some notes. Okay, part B. Is there any indication that members of the population differ in fitness? So if seed size varies with nutrients, as we have concluded from an observation given to us in the previous part, the selection against large or small seeds is not necessarily selection against any particular genotype. There would be no genetic difference in fitness. So up to now, what we've looked at, there has been a fitness difference between seed sizes, in that the medium and the large seeds up till now have been selected against, giving them a lower fitness, and these small seeds had a higher fitness because they were not selected against by selection. And that's kind of what we've seen up until now. because those traits were assumed to be heritable. Now we are assuming, based on an observation, that those traits are not heritable. So eating the large seeds and the medium seeds would not affect, would not necessarily be selection against any particular genotype because those traits are not connected to a genotype. They're connected to nutrient availability, or in this case, sunlight. So no genetic difference in fitness between those seed sizes. So yes, mice targeting the medium and large seeds would not affect future generations' ability to produce those large or medium seeds. So part C, given your answers to part A and B, what trend should characterize the future behavior or composition of the population? So if there's no selection and no difference in fitness among surviving seeds, then the populations should remain relatively stable in genetic composition. So again, like this point here, just because the mice are targeting those medium and large seeds, we're not affecting future generations' ability to produce those seeds. So populations should remain relatively stable in genetic composition over time. Okay. So we're gonna do this graph here and indicate how this might impact population size of different types of cherry trees on the island. So all seed sizes will be approximately equally abundant, as seed size is not genetically determined, and each tree produces a range of seed sizes. So I'm going to give you about, 30 seconds to draw a quick little graph. Again, we're just looking for basic trend lines. So based on this information here, all seed sizes are approximately equal because they are not genetically determined. Let's just draw a quick graph and I will have an example for you. But let's just take 30 seconds. So it's all about in this range, remain range. I've got a bit of a lag here. I hope you can hear me okay. So yeah, they go up and down a little bit. There's some variation, but on average, they're all staying at about the same abundance. So the population of each type of tree and the seed abundance will remain constant in this situation as well. So scenario 3, part B, would your answer for scenario 3A change given the following information? So as you continue to study these populations, you know that the viability of seeds does not vary with size. Over time, however, you find that the trees that grow from the smallest seeds produce fewer large seeds. So there's no viability difference between the seeds. So any size seed has the same chance of growing a new tree. But trees that are grown from the smallest seeds produce fewer large seeds. So decide whether or not natural selection is operating. So before we considered the observation that seed size varied with exposure to sun. Now we are observing that the trees grown from small seeds produce fewer large seeds. So we have kind of these different observations. So this information that small seeds end up growing trees that produce smaller seeds provides evidence that seed size is heritable and not a result of conditions. So we kind of had some competing observations, so to speak. But it's possible you see that these trees that produce fewer large seeds still have larger seeds towards the sunnier areas and smaller seeds towards the shadier areas, but overall have fewer larger seeds. So there can be a combination of things acting here. But the second observation leans towards this trait is heritable to some extent. So B, is there indication that members of the population differ in fitness? So before we have the word viability did differ. Here we have the viability of the seed does not vary with size. So the mice are still selecting against the large and medium seeds. There is no association between fitness and seed size. So because there's no viability difference, there's no difference in fitness associated with seed size. But we do still have selection against those large and medium seeds. So the small seeds would survive more frequently, sorry for that typo, compared to large and medium seeds. Okay, part C. Given your answers to part A and B, what trend should characterize future behavior or composition of the population? So over time, you would expect to see more offspring from small sized seeds because we have that selection working against the large and medium seeds, taking them out of the running, and so we have more small seeds being able to produce trees. So as a result, the production of small seeds would also be higher because we're seeing that the small sized seeds grow trees that produce smaller seeds. So not only would we expect more offspring from the small sized seeds, we would expect a higher production of the small sized seeds as a result. Okay, so we're moving on to our last scenario here, and then we've got a few more questions. So, after a severe spring ice storm, about half of the finches or small birds in a population are found dead. Examination of the dead birds indicates that they vary in age from young to old. About 60% of the dead are fledglings, just left the nest, and about 20% are over 3 years of age, which is quite old for this species. So decide whether or not natural selection is operating, and in doing this, indicate whether there is variability in the population. So the majority of dead birds are either very young or very old. Both the young and the elderly are particularly vulnerable due to a lack of experience and declining health, respectively. So these characteristics associated with age are not necessarily genetic differences between these individuals, being the individuals that died, and those that survived. So the trait of age isn't a genetic difference between those who died and those who survived. So these observations lend to the lack of selection in this scenario, as we saw before when we considered if seed size was a result of sun exposure. That was not a um, it was not based in genetics, and in that case also we kind of concluded that selection was not occurring. Or sorry, there was no fitness difference in that. Here it's not a genetic difference, so selection is not occurring. Apologies if I confused you there. Okay, is there any indication that members of this population differ in fitness? This kind of goes more with what I was mentioning a moment ago. So to argue for selection would be to argue that the two extremes, the very young and the very old, are being selected against. This would mean that subsequent generations would have more middle-aged individuals, because fitness again is linked to genetic makeup here. As all individuals start out young, this argument is unsound and illogical. Thus, there's no fitness difference between the young, old, and middle-aged individuals. This whole scenario has no basis. Just give you a moment to take notes. Okay, part C. Given your answers to A and B, what trend should characterize the future behavior or composition of the population? So without further information to indicate that only specific types of young and old birds died, we cannot say that genetic selection occurred. Therefore, we would expect to see no significant changes in genetics of this population. So we're not being told, say, that there is some gene that presents itself in older age and is only present in a subset of the population. If there was some gene that was onset when you got older and we saw that only those elderly died in this storm, then you might have some genetic basis for selection. But we're not seeing anything like that. There's no specific type of young and old birds that died. So there's no selection, and there's no significant changes in the genetics of the population over time. So that was our last scenario. These are a little less involved. So we've got a figure here on the left. We've got that distribution of a phenotype, a phenotypic characteristic in a population. And we're shown three proportions, proportion A, proportion B, and proportion C. So we've got the two extremes here, and then this mean phenotype. And we're going to use these answers, A through E, to answer the following three questions. So male sicklebacks with bright red coloring are favored by female sicklebacks as mates. However, the bright red color makes the males more likely to be seen by predators. So let's consider here C. Let's do C as the bright red coloring. We'll do A as a pale color and B as a medium. So we know that that bright red color is going to be more likely to find a mate, and that A, that pale color, is going to be less likely to find a mate. We also know that the red color bird is more likely to be eaten by predators. And we have these options here. Who is the least likely? to be able to reproduce and survive. We have these options, portion A being the pale birds, only portion B being the average birds, or portion C, the red birds. We could also have proportion A and C simultaneously, or B and C simultaneously. The best answer is going to be D here, because the bright males, C, are selected against as their color makes them easy to spot and catch, despite that they are favored by the females. There is still selection working against them. We are going to see that the pale males, A, would also be acted upon by selection, as they would not be able to find mates. So they would be, sorry, that froze a little bit. Hopefully you can hear me. So the bright red birds have selection working against them, acting against them in the form of predation, and the pale male birds have selection working against them in the form of their ability to find a mate. So the answer D is the best here. So B, on island Z in the Galapagos, the plant population contains only 2 species. One of the 2 plant species produces very large seeds, and the other produces very small seeds. A species of seed-eating finch has lived on the island for many years. Members of this established species have large beaks and prefer large seeds. A small population of a different species of seed-eating finch has migrated to the island. The beak size of this new species population varies over a continuum, from relatively small to relatively large. So how will the evolution of the new finch species be affected? So we know that the food source on the island is either very large or very small seeds. We know that there is already a population on the species or on the island feeding on the large seeds. So they're already feeding on that resource. And then we have a new species that has genetics for all different beak types. So let's say that A, the proportion A, is very small beaks. B is going to be kind of like intermediate, and C will be large beaks. So okay, so the birds that come to the island. Oh, apologies. So the best answer is C, though proportion B may be affected as well. So let's consider this. So the large beak proportion C, they are competing for resources with the established birds. So they're going to have the greatest selection acting on them due to a competition for resources. So proportion B may be affected as well. So individuals in the high end of the middle range may also face some selective pressure due to a lack of intermediate sized seeds. So if we're seeing large beak size, maybe correlates with large body size, and they go for these large seeds, possibly to better fuel them. And these small birds can go for the small seeds, but it's possible the medium-sized birds who cannot eat the large seeds can only eat the small seeds, but potentially those small seeds they struggle to maintain themselves on, might be not enough nutrients for them. So those could be affected as well. So part C, let me go back and just give you another moment with that. Okay, so this is our last one here. In a species of plant-eating land snail, the shell color is variable and ranges from very light to intermediate to very dark in color. The snails are preyed upon by birds that use sight to find their prey. A small population of these snails is moved to an island where the food plants in their preferred habitat are either very light in color or very dark in color. So we know here that shells, let's say A is going to be very light, B will be those intermediate colors, and C will be quite dark. And we see that in their habitat, they have either, their habitat kind of consists of very light colors and very dark colors. And they are preyed upon by a bird that uses sight. So what do we think here? Is it going to be combination, or will it be proportion A is least likely to survive, proportion B is least likely to survive, proportion C, or some form of combination? So the best answer here is B. The intermediate colored snail has no camouflage. It's not going to blend into the light or the very dark plants on the island. So this makes them most likely to be spotted and eaten. The selection is acting upon proportion B. And when we have that intermediate being acted on, what kind of selection is that? So that'll be disruptive. And let's see here, just for fun. So part A, we had D. So we were working on A and C. So what kind of selection was that? We're selecting against both of the extremes. So that is stabilizing selection. Here we had C, that was working on just one side, one extreme. So you'd see directional selection. And again, this last one here was disruptive. Okay, so that was everything. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. I hope this is helpful for you all. Okay, and were there any questions?